addition to the governance changes that the SEC mandated for the 2010 proxy season, they also adopted a number of compensation disclosure-related amendments to their rules that were applicable for 2010. The first, and perhaps the most controversial, required companies to disclose whether any of their compensation programs, not just those applicable to executives, but those applicable to all employees, created a reasonable likelihood of a material adverse effect on the company. Most companies concluded that that was not the case, and the SEC rules did not require any disclosure if a company so concluded. However, based on comments by SEC staff members and risk metrics, many companies did in fact provide negative disclosure about their compensation risk this year. An SEC staff member had indicated at the SEC Speaks conference that the SEC expected or would ask about whether the company had a process for assessing compensation risk if there was no disclosure. And people from risk metrics had indicated that they certainly expected some disclosure in this area. So far more companies than expected did provide some disclosure about compensation risk, even where they had concluded that there was no materially adverse impact. The SEC staff has more recently indicated that in the comment process, they will ask companies about the process they followed if there is no disclosure, but on the other hand, they don't necessarily expect that there will be negative disclosure. But be that as it may, what did companies in fact disclose? Many talked about the fact that their compensation committee had undertaken a process to assess the risks of their compensation programs. Many also talked about some of the mitigating factors that they had considered in determining that there was no adverse impact, including things like clawback provisions, multiple metrics, multiple year plans. Some indicated that therefore there were no excess risk or that they guarded against it. So I think we will perhaps see some additional guidance from the SEC in the form of the comment letters that they provide to companies on their disclosures. The staff has indicated they are not going to be doing a separate project on disclosure in this area, but will address it in connection with the comment process. Another change in the compensation disclosure was related to the reporting of equity compensation grants. Rather than reporting in the summary compensation table the accounting expense of equity grants, companies are now required to report the grant date fair value, which means that for those companies that made large grants in 2009, the disclosure in the summary compensation table is going to look very different than it otherwise would have. And in fact, because of that, we're seeing some companies provide alternative supplemental tables in their compensation disclosure and analysis. Companies also were required to go back for the individuals whose compensation was disclosed in the summary compensation table and restate compensation for 2010 and prior years. The last piece of compensation disclosure that's new this year is enhanced disclosure about compensation consultants who provide services to the company in addition to the services they provide to the compensation committee. And I think in line with current practice, which is moving towards compensation committees having independent consultants, there was not a whole lot of disclosure in this area, although companies that did use their compensation consultants for other kinds of services very often provided the rationale for why they believed that that did not impact the independence of the advice provided to compensation committees.